reconnaissance photographed this area 12 times between the 20th of April and the 4th of June. German intelligence reports noted the gradual buildup, the arrival of additional formations, the appearance of new wireless traffic, exactly as planners intended. Sergeant James Ralston of No. 5 Camouflage Company Royal Engineers described the work in his post-war memoir. "We'd arrive at a field near Ashford at dawn, unload 30 collapsed dummies from the L-Rise, and by noon you'd have a squadron of Sherman sitting there looking proper enough to fool anyone driving past on the road." The trick wasn't just putting them up. It was making them look lived in. We'd scatter empty petrol tins about, dig proper latrines at regulation distance, park a recovery vehicle nearby, string some washing on lines between trees. One fellow even scattered cigarette ends of American brands near the tanks. Seemed dafted at the time, but the officers insisted the Germans might photograph at low level. This attention to mundane detail reflected hard lessons from earlier, less successful deception operations. In North Africa, dummy tanks used in 1941 to 42 often failed because they appeared too clean, too perfectly positioned, lacking the accumulated debris and minor variations that characterize real military installations. A genuine tank leaks oil, creating stains. Crews park them slightly differently each time they return from maneuvers. Prolonged use creates worn pathways to latrines, creates bare earth where soldiers sit during breaks, accumulates the random clutter of soldiers' lives. The sophisticated 1944 dummies incorporated these lessons. They weren't just models of tanks. They were models of tank units, complete with the environmental evidence of hundreds of soldiers living and working in the area. The deception units also orchestrated carefully scripted security failures to make German espionage feel it was succeeding. British intelligence knew the Germans ran agents in England, and knew specifically which ones because most had been captured and turned into double agents. These controlled assets reported observing tank movements near counting vehicles on trains, overhearing soldiers in pubs mention units by designation. Each report corroborated the aerial photography. When reconnaissance photographed new dummy installations, within days, a double agent would report hearing local talk about Americans with tanks moving into the area. The synchronization was precise enough that German intelligence could cross-reference multiple independent sources and find perfect agreement, never realizing all sources ultimately trace back to British control. The conventional wisdom held that intelligence analysts trained to be suspicious would see through deception. German photo interpreters had years of experience identifying Allied equipment, new British deception techniques, and approached their work with systematic rigor. They should have caught the inconsistencies, the too perfect presentations, the installations that appeared more by design than by military necessity. They didn't because the British understood a fundamental principle about intelligence analysis. Analysts operate within frameworks of expectation. When reconnaissance photographs showed tank formations where wireless intelligence suggested a major headquarters, where agent reports confirmed American units, where defensive dispositions made strategic sense for an invasion toward Kala, interpreters saw confirmation of what the broader intelligence picture predicted. They weren't fooled by the dummies alone. They were convinced by the totality of an intelligence environment carefully orchestrated to make the dummies seem like just one more piece of a coherent picture. This wasn't merely fooling German reconnaissance. It was exploiting how intelligence organizations function. The Wehrmacht's intelligence system suffered from compartmentalization. Photo interpreters analyzed images. Wireless intelligence decoded transmissions. Agent handlers evaluated human reports, and strategic analysts synthesized these sources. At no point did a single person with complete knowledge of all sources sit in a field in Kent, examining a dummy tank with suspicion. Instead, each element reinforced the others through an organizational structure that valued corroboration across independent sources. The British created exactly that corroboration. ensuring that every intelligence discipline the Germans consulted told them the same story. German defenders in Normandy experienced the consequences directly. When Allied forces landed on the 6th of June 1944, the German 15th Army, comprising 19 divisions, including several panzer divisions, remained positioned near Kalala, convinced that Normandy was a diversion and the main assault would still strike there. This positioning was directly influenced by intelligence assessments, citing the massive tank concentrations in southeastern England photographed by Luftwaffe reconnaissance. Not until late July, nearly 8 weeks after D-Day, did German High Command acknowledge that no second invasion would come. By then, Allied forces had broken out of the Normandy hedge, and the opportunity to concentrate overwhelming force against the beachhead had passed. Field Marshal Ger von Rund, Commander-in-Chief West, later told interrogators that the intelligence picture showing Patton's army group near Dover had decisive influence on German defensive planning. Wehrmacht staff officers had calculated that moving the 15th Army's panzer divisions to Normandy would require 3 to 4 days given Allied air superiority. Those divisions could have reached the battlefield by the 9th or 10th of June, when the Allied lodgment was most vulnerable. Instead, they remained near Kalala, defending against an invasion that existed only in timber, canvas, wireless transmissions, and carefully managed German certainty. The success of Operation Fortitude carried a darkly ironic postscript. After the war, Allied investigators discovered that Abbas von Rohn, the intelligence officer whose reports most strongly supported the Kala hypothesis, had been executed in October 1944 for alleged involvement in the 20th July plot against Hitler. His crime wasn't poor intelligence. Quite the opposite. Von Rohn had been so convincing in his assessments of Allied strength, so certain in his analysis that Patton commanded massive forces near Dover that his reports contributed to Hitler's decision to keep the 15th Army in position, even as Normandy became obviously the main effort. The tragedy was that von Rohn's analysis wasn't incompetent. It was rigorous, methodical, and based on every source available to German intelligence. The British hadn't simply tricked him. They'd constructed an alternative reality so complete, so consistent across every dimension of observable evidence that reaching any other conclusion would have required rejecting sound analytical practice. Von Rohn's mistake wasn't being fooled by dummy tanks. It was being fooled by a system that created perfect correlation between what German reconnaissance saw, what wireless intelligence heard, what agents reported, and what strategic logic suggested. He did exactly what a talented analyst should do: synthesize multiple sources, look for corroboration, and report his conclusions with appropriate certainty. The British had engineered an intelligence environment where doing one's job well meant reaching exactly the wrong conclusion. This reveals the deepest principle behind successful strategic deception. It doesn't work by tricking people into seeing what isn't there. It works by manipulating the context within which people evaluate what they see, making the false seem more plausible than the true. The dummy tanks weren't clever forgeries. They were adequate props within a comprehensive narrative that controlled how intelligence organizations interpreted every piece of information they collected. Britain's wooden tank army succeeded not because German intelligence was unsophisticated, but because it was sophisticated in predictable ways. The Wehrmacht had built an intelligence apparatus that gathered information from multiple sources, sought corroboration between them, and rewarded analysts who could synthesize diverse information into coherent assessments. The British exploited that very sophistication, feeding each source information that would corroborate the others, ensuring that rigorous analysis would reach precisely the conclusion they wanted. The dummy tanks themselves were almost trivial. 15 lb worth of timber and canvas erected in hours, lighter than a motorcycle. What made them powerful wasn't their construction, but their context, the comprehensive deception environment that made them read as real to every sensor and analytical method the Germans employed. They represented the transformation of deception from tactical camouflage to operational art, from hiding what exists to controlling what the enemy believes exists. In the end, those wooden tanks at Dover achieved what 40-ton Churchills could never have done from the same location. They held 19 German divisions in place for 8 crucial weeks, whilst real Allied tanks fought their way across Normandy. The dummy tanks never fired a shot, never moved under their own power, never intimidated a German soldier with genuine menace. Yet, their contribution to Allied victory was quite literally strategic. They weren't weapons of war. They were weapons made of belief, constructed to exploit the enemy's own intelligence systems. And for that singular purpose, canvas and timber proved more powerful than steel.